At the centre of the table sits a wooden bowl filled with dark, almost black bread, so dense it could crack a tooth, this bread, a lifeline baked from grains coaxed from stubborn soil. Rye, oats, barley, wheat, the cherished grain, rarely reached the peasants' hands, reserved for nobles and monasteries. Historians still debate whether medieval villagers truly despised their dark loaves or merely accepted them with a stoic, fatalistic resilience. Regardless, you chew slowly. The taste is earthy, slightly sour, the texture heavy but strangely satisfying. By the hearth, a pot simmers, though its contents are humble, likely a porridge of oats thinned with water, perhaps with a pinch of salt if luck holds. The smell is faint, more a whisper than a promise, but on a frozen night it fills the belly and grants one more day. You watch the smallest child cradle a wooden spoon like a treasure, warmth radiating into his tiny fingers. Here lies a central truth. Across much of Europe, peasants derived nearly 3/4 of their daily calories from grain. Bread, porridge, and weak ale were not side dishes, they were the bedrock of survival. Yet, in the corner, you note something peculiar. An old woman mutters softly as she slips a sprig of dried rosemary into the boiling pot. She insists the herb wards off winter fever. Odd little details like this remind you that food was not just sustenance but also medicine, ritual, even a touch of magic. Some villagers swore that onion skins on the windowsill kept frost spirits at bay. Did it work? You can judge for yourself as you watch her nod with quiet conviction. Still, anxiety haunts the edges of every meal. Stores are dwindling, each mouthful measured. You glance toward the ladder where a small iron-bound chest holds precious reserves. A few hard cheeses wrapped in cloth, a shrinking salt-cured ham, bundles of leeks preserved in straw. Every scrap counts. A mouse skittering in the shadows is not just a nuisance, it is a thief stealing survival itself. A chill runs through you, not from the cold outside, but from a realization. Hunger is always lurking nearby. You edge closer to the hearth fire, the wood crackling like a lullaby. The children, cheeks flushed with warmth, drift asleep while the parents stay awake, silently counting the loaves left, the weeks until the thaw. And you, a visitor from another time, can almost hear the quiet arithmetic of survival echoing in the room. Will the bread last until spring? Is there enough in the ale barrel? Historians still debate whether peasants in normal winter years were often truly hungry, but certainly the memory of famine haunted every household, shaping their frugal habits and rituals. As you lean back, eyelids growing heavy, you realize the frost on the door is more than decoration. It is a constant reminder. Winter tests both body and spirit. You have taken your first step into their world, where every breadcrumb is precious, and every hearth fire must burn until dawn. You wake in the dim light of a winter morning, the sun struggling to pierce the clouds. Even inside, your breath frosts the air, for not even the dying embers of last night's hearth can banish the chill. The family stirs slowly, and the first task of the day is not milking the cow or tending the fields, but reaching for the bread. The loaf on the table bears little resemblance to the fluffy, sliced bread you know. It is dark, heavy, dense, hacked into uneven chunks with a blunt knife. The crust is hard as wood, thudding dully when tapped. Inside, it reveals a coarse, slightly grey crumb flecked with husks. You tear off a piece. The smell is earthy, sour, tinged with the smoke of the bakehouse fire. This is not about pleasure, it is about survival. Bread dominated their diet. For the medieval European peasant, it formed the bulk of daily calories. Grain mattered more than garnish, and the type of bread revealed your place in society. The nobility ate fine white wheat bread, light and soft. Peasants may do with loaves of rye, barley, or oats, darker and denser. Historians still debate whether peasants saw white bread as an aspirational dream or found it tasteless compared to their hearty rye. What's undeniable is that the hierarchy of grain mirrored the hierarchy of man. You sit with the family as they bless the bread, then slice it with care. Each portion is measured, for the stores must last. They eat in silence, the sound of chewing mingling with the crackle of the fire. Butter is a rarity, cheese a treat, and the bread is often washed down with thin ale to ease its dryness. You likely couldn't survive long on this alone. Yet for them, it is both comfort and necessity. In lean years, bread might be bulked out with peas, beans, chestnuts, even ground acorns. There's a grim tale of desperate villagers mixing sawdust into their flour, tricking their stomachs into feeling full. Imagine biting into that bread. Wood grit between your teeth, a rough scrape on the tongue. Yet the choice was simple: eat what you have or starve. Not all bread was equal, however. Outside in the village square, the Lord Steward is collecting the grain tax. Sacks of wheat are loaded onto carts bound for the manor. While the peasants take their rye home, bread became a symbol not just of nourishment, but of social order. The Latin word companion means one who shares bread. To break bread together was an act of survival as much as community. You follow a child clutching a wrapped loaf, headed for the church. Here, on feast days, bread might be blessed and shared. Sometimes mixed with holy water or salt did consecrated bread taste better. Historians still debate the significance, spiritual or purely symbolic, but for the villagers, the line between faith and food blurred easily. Bread was both body and spirit. In another home, you watch a woman knead dough, her arms dusted with flour. She works it forcefully on a rough board, pressing with a rhythmic thump, muttering a charm against hunger spirits as she goes. The dough rises slowly by the hearth, covered with a cloth. The smell of yeast fills the room, a faint sweetness hinting at life. Later, she will slide it into a clay oven, smoke curling up as if the bread itself is breathing. That oven is not hers alone. Often, an entire village shared a common bakehouse. Each household marked their loaf, a cross, initials, a simple notch. To claim it after baking, the bread emerges hard, cracked, but nourishing. The family gathers around it almost reverently. For them, each loaf is not just food but a bulwark against the cold and the long night. The crust resists your teeth, but once broken, the dense chew fills your mouth. Slowly, a warmth spreads, not just from the heat but from eating something that connects you to the land itself. You lean back, crumbs on your lips, and wonder, could you live on bread alone? For many a medieval peasant, the answer was yes, at least through the harshest months. You would grow weary of the monotony, but when the frost outside threatens to bite deeper, bread is the shield between life and hunger. So, as the family finishes their meagre portion and wraps the remainder for later, you feel both the weight of their daily struggle and the strange comfort of their rituals. Bread is their lifeline, coarse but enduring, humble yet holy. The morning wears on, and you follow a snow-dusted path to another cottage. Inside, the family has moved from bread to the second pillar of their day, porridge. You watch a mother bend over the hearth, stirring a pot hung from a hook above the flames. The mixture bubbles thickly, emitting the smell of warm grain, simple, filling, steady. You scoop a spoonful and find the porridge coarse, dotted with tiny husks. Oats and barley dominate here, sometimes millet or buckwheat depending on the region. Well documented. This gruel was the staple of countless winter mornings, eaten not for pleasure but for the energy to face a day's labour. A little salt improves it. A dab of honey is a near luxury. With nothing, it is bland but life-sustaining. A peculiar custom surfaces as you watch a child sprinkle dried herbs into the pot. Sage, perhaps, or parsley. Villagers believed certain greens could ward off winter coughs or keep malignant spirits at bay during the long nights. Sometimes they tossed bits of stale bread into the porridge, wasting not a crumb. Other times, weak ale replaced water, adding a faint tang. You smile at the thought of beer for breakfast before the day's work even begins. But this humble bowl holds more than meets the eye. Scholars still debate just how much variety truly existed in a peasant's pot. Some argue they regularly mixed in peas, beans, and root vegetables, while others contend the winter diet was painfully monotonous, unadorned. Whatever the truth, you can feel how the repetition wore on the spirit. The family eats silently, chewing each mouthful with patient resignation, though the children sometimes slurp loudly just to break the quiet. Your spoon digs deeper, the texture thickening as the porridge cools. Imagine eating this every morning for months on end, each bowl nearly identical to the last. Yet within this monotony lies survival. With each swallow, warmth spreads like a soft shield across your chest, holding the icy encroachment at bay. You close your eyes, listening to the hiss of burning logs, the scrape of wooden spoons, the murmured prayers for the stores to last until spring. As you finish, you realize porridge is more than food. It is rhythm, ritual, a reassurance in a season where little else feels certain. You step outside again, the cold air stinging your face. Snowflakes drift lazily across the village lane, settling on doorsteps, clinging to your cloak. A neighbour beckons you inside, and in the centre of her table an earthenware jug stands proud. She pours a cloudy amber liquid into a wooden cup, and the faintly sour-sweet scent hits your nose at once. This is not fresh water. This is weak ale, the true drink of winter survival. You raise the cup. The taste surprises you. It is thin, more like a mild grain tea than the potent beer you know today. This is small beer, brewed at home from leftover grains, just strong enough to kill harmful bacteria in the water. Medieval household records show weak ale as the daily drink, consumed even by children because wells and streams were often fouled with waste. Rather than risk sickness, one sip this mild brew you drink and a gentle warmth spreads through you. Not enough to intoxicate, but enough to chase the morning chill. A peculiar practice involved reusing the grain multiple times. The first brew was strongest, saved for feasts or the Lord's table. The second or third, watered down, went to the peasants. By the fourth, the drink was little more than flavoured water. Yet even that was safer than the stinking pond outside. You can almost hear the villagers' wry quip that their children were raised on ale, not milk still. Researchers debate just how dominant weak ale was in the peasant diet. Some claim villagers consumed up to a gallon per person daily, while others argue the figure is exaggerated, noting grain scarcity in poor harvest years. The truth likely lies in between, a steady, meal-accompanying trickle of weak ale, keeping people hydrated and somewhat comforted through endless frosts. You glance around the room. The walls are blackened from years of smoke, and in the corner sits a small wooden tub, the brewing vessel. The process was laborious. Boiling water, steeping grain, straining through cloth, then fermenting near the hearth. The smell of damp barley hangs in the air. Earthy and raw brewing was often women's work, a quiet skill passed from mother to daughter. Without it, a household faltered. Imagine the thirst and sickness that would follow if a batch soured or spoiled, and ale was more than nutrition. It played a social role. Villagers gathered in the tavern to share stronger brews, songs echoing off the beams as snow fell outside. The tavern's glow became a beacon of warmth, a rare place where laughter could briefly drown out hunger. For some, a night of drinking blurred the memory of empty cupboards. For others, it was a chance to exchange gossip, arrange marriages, or bargain over debts. The thin ale on your tongue, humble as it is, connects you to these rhythms of life. A child in the cottage clutches a cup, gulping eagerly. You hesitate, but then recall that water could be deadly, while weak ale was not. Even infants were sometimes given diluted ale, foam clinging to their lips. Chroniclers note that during plagues, townsfolk relied more on ale than water, believing it offered protection. Was it the alcohol, the boiled brewing water, or simply faith in tradition? The question hangs as you lean back, your thoughts wander further. Imagine trekking across snow-covered fields, a skin of weak ale at your belt. Each sip brings not exhilaration but endurance, a steady trickle of energy. Peasants drank it before chopping wood in winter. Shepherds sipped it while guarding flocks from wolves. Wives swallowed it as they spun wool by the dim hearth fire. A strange story whispers that some villagers flavoured their ale with heather, nettles, even mushrooms, claiming such mixtures brought visions or courage. Were these eccentric brewers or early experimenters in folk medicine? None can say for sure, but the tales have drifted down the centuries like smoke. The jug on the table is empty, and the family begins preparing another batch. Grain is precious, but the choice is pragmatic. Risk foul water or sacrifice some barley for brew. The fire flickers, the woman stirs, steam rising like the room's own breath. You close your eyes, listening to the faint hiss of boiling water, the soft song she hums to mark the brewing time, and you realise ale is not a luxury nor an indulgence. It is the connective tissue of daily life, safer than the stream, warmer than the frost, and humble enough to accompany both feast and famine. With every swallow, the peasant endured another hour of the relentless winter. Your cup is empty, but your senses linger on the faint tang of barley, the murmur of voices, and the certainty that without this murky brew the whole village would have faltered long before the snow melt. You leave the smoky cottage and follow a path hedged by snow-laden bushes. The fields are a silent white, yet you notice mounds in the ground, plots hiding secrets from last autumn's harvest. Beneath layers of straw, under upturned baskets, vegetables cling stubbornly to life. They are not glamorous crops, but they are lifelines. Turnips, leeks, onions, hardy cabbages, each planted with the knowledge that winter always comes too soon. A peasant kneels in the frosty dirt, brushing aside straw to reveal pale leeks. The smell is pungent, grassy, a reminder of soil long frozen. He wipes them clean on his tunic and hands them to his wife, who will chop them into the evening stew. Archaeological finds confirm root vegetables like leeks and parsnips were staples in peasant gardens, especially since they withstood cold better than most grains. Without these hardy greens, supper would be thinner. A peculiar survival trick was storing vegetables directly in pits dug into the earth. Families filled these holes with carrots, turnips, or beets, then sealed them with straw and soil. The earth itself acted as an icebox, slowing decay. Imagine digging through frozen ground when fingers are numb and the wind cuts like a knife. Yet the ritual repeated, each retrieval a small victory over winter. Researchers still debate just how diverse these gardens were. Some argue peasants cultivated an impressive array of plants, from legumes and peas to herbs, while others contend the common winter diet narrowed sharply to a few hardy survivors. The truth likely varied from village to village, depending on soil, climate, and luck. Still, you can picture the family crowding their patch in autumn, praying the cabbages would last until March. You move closer, noticing a strange bundle hanging from a shed rafter, ropes of onions braided together. Each onion gleams faintly, its papery skin rustling to the touch. Hanging like this kept them dry, preventing rot. The sight is both practical and surprisingly beautiful, a garland of survival. Nearby, dried beans in their pods rattle softly in the cold breeze, another hidden treasure for the stew. Inside a cottage, you watch the vegetables being prepared. A turnip is cut into wedges, the pale flesh firm, tossed into the pot alongside oats and herbs. The smell builds slowly, earthy and sweet, filling the smoky room. Children peer over the rim, eager for a taste, while their mother reminds them that patience makes the belly fuller. Later, you spoon up a mouthful. Though the broth is thin, it carries the comforting weight of the land itself. A peculiar custom comes to mind. In some regions, villagers believed cabbages planted under a waning moon stored longer. Others swore leeks hung by the door warded off witches. Whether superstition or desperate hope, such practices reveal how vulnerable food felt in the face of an unpredictable winter. Imagine believing a whispered spell over a turnip could keep famine at bay. It seems quaint, but in that age, every little ritual mattered. The debate among historians continues. Just how well nourished were peasants? Some argue that with vegetables, grains, and occasional dairy, their diet was surprisingly balanced compared to later centuries. Others contend malnutrition was rife, with vitamin deficiencies causing scurvy-like symptoms or brittle bones. As you chew the fibrous stalk of a leek, you realize the truth was likely both. One winter generous, the next cruel. Outside again, you pass a small garden fenced with woven sticks. The ground crunches underfoot, frozen solid, but remnants of autumn persist. Kale leaves curled like fists, herbs blackened by frost, a few stubborn carrots hiding beneath straw. Chickens scratch the dirt, seeking anything edible. The scene is quiet, but beneath it lies a web of planning, storing, and hope that kept peasants alive year after year. And so you understand, these hidden gardens were not luxuries, they were shields. Every cabbage head, every rope of onions, every turnip buried in earth, represented another day between hunger and survival. Without them, bread and ale alone would not suffice. The land, even under snow, still whispered its gifts. If you knew where to look, if you remembered where you buried them, if luck allowed you to dig them up again. You inhale the cold air, laced with scents of earth and smoke, and commit the image of those frost-guarded gardens to memory. They are testaments that, even in the bleakest months, life insisted on pushing through. Leaf by stubborn leaf, as the snow begins to fall harder, you duck into another dwelling. The roof groans under its weight, and a bitter draught finds its way through the wall cracks. Inside, the air smells of wood smoke and something more enticing. The unmistakable pungent scent of salted meat, strings of pork and beef strips hang above the hearth, darkened and glistening after weeks of curing. This is not fresh meat, but it is survival incarnate. The family takes pride in their stores. Preserving meat was laborious and costly, but it offered the closest thing to security through the lean months. Chronicles of manorial life show pigs were the cornerstone of peasant husbandry, fattened on acorns and scraps in late autumn, then slaughtered and salted or smoked to last deep into winter. The result was tough, chewy, sometimes unpleasantly salty, but every mouthful provided the calories needed to endure frozen days. A peculiar sight stays with you. In some villages, neighbours gathered for a ritual known as the killing of the pig. It was both solemn and festive, a chance to share the labour of butchery and celebrate the harvest. Songs might be sung, weak ale poured generously, and scraps shared immediately as a feast before the real preserving began. Children licked greasy fingers that night, knowing the rest of the animal would become treasure for months to come. Yet scholars still debate how often peasants truly tasted meat. Some argue pork was a rare treat, reserved for feast days or slaughter time. Others contend small bits of salted meat appeared regularly in stews. Archaeological bone finds suggest meat was not entirely absent, but certainly not a daily enjoyment. As you watch the mother slice a strip of salt pork, thin slivers of pig into the pot, it becomes clear meat flavoured the meal but never dominated. You edge closer to the hearth, watching fat drip into the fire, sizzling. The smell fills the small room, smoky and rich, more appetising than yesterday's porridge. Even a small piece of pork boiled with cabbage or turnips elevated a meal into something memorable. Children's eyes light up at the sight of grease shimmering on the broth's surface. Imagine the psychological lift, knowing tonight's dinner would taste different, richer, more substantial. Of course, there were dangers. Salt was expensive, and not every family could afford enough to cure large amounts. Some cut corners, causing stored meat to spoil, potentially sickening the whole household. Others stretched supplies by mixing animal fat with grain, creating thick soups where meat was more a seasoning than a substance. You stare into the bubbling stew, wondering whether the saltiness on your tongue masks preservation or desperation. Then there was lard, stored in clay pots or bladders. Lard became a winter companion, spread on bread, stirred into porridge, or greasing a pan well documented. Fat was a precious form of energy, a shield against biting cold without it. Bodies weakened quickly, unable to bear the labour of gathering wood or fetching water. A spoonful of lard might seem insignificant, but it could mean the difference between exhaustion and enduring. A peculiar folk belief surfaces as you recall stories from rural Europe. Smoked hams were sometimes hung not just for preservation but to ward off evil spirits. Some families tied charms to the hooks, fearing witches might spoil their stores. Did they truly believe jealous neighbours could curse a ham? Perhaps. But when winter sharpened its claws, suspicion bred easily, and every precaution mattered. Academic debate continues over the balance of dairy, fish, and meat in the peasant diet. Was salted pork a true staple, or were fish and cheese more common? Excavated middens reveal bones, shells, and pottery shards, but proportions remain elusive to you. Sitting by the hearth, watching salt beef soften in the pot, the debate feels abstract. What matters is the steam rising, the anticipation of flavour after days of bland fare. Night falls early. The family gathers, tearing off bits of bread to sop up the stew. The salt pork is chewy, almost rubbery, but its richness seeps into the broth, making every spoonful hearty. A child gnaws on a bone with a bit of meat, content, while the father saves a strip of fat for tomorrow's breakfast. Nothing is wasted. Skin, marrow, offal, even the pig's bladder might become a pouch, its bristles a brush. You close your eyes, savouring the faintly sweet, smoky taste lingering on your lips, realising how precious these stores were. Without salted pork, beef or lard, the winter table would be bread and roots alone. Meat, in any form, provided not just strength but also morale, a sense that someone who planned well in autumn was still faintly favoured by fate. As the wind rattles the shutters, you are grateful for the strange comfort of salt and smoke, in its own way a guardian of the peasant hearth, warding off hunger as surely as the fire warded off frost. The wind grows sharper, rattling loose shutters and startling a murder of crows. You walk along the village's edge, where fields blend into woodland, and you sense another facet of survival: hunting. For most peasants, game was not meant for their table. Law and privilege intertwined, reserving forests as the Lord's hunting preserve. Yet hunger knows no law, and in the darkest winters snares and slingshots emerged from hiding. You crouch beside a boy checking a simple trap, a noose hidden beneath the snow. Today he is lucky. A rabbit kicks feebly, its leg caught. The boy acts swiftly, murmuring a prayer as he ends the animal's struggle. Chroniclers note that hares, rabbits and small birds often found their way into peasant pots, despite threats of punishment. Legally, these woods belonged to the manor. Informally, hunger claimed its own. A peculiar story survives from the records of a Yorkshire village. A man was fined for poaching a deer, but the court roll noted his children were thin as fence posts. Pity occasionally softened justice, but only slightly imagine risking a beating or worse for a hare that barely fed a family. Yet the alternative was hunger, gnawing at the door like a wolf. Experts still debate just how frequent such poaching was. Some argue it was a rare act of the desperation, undertaken only when famine threatened others, see it as a quiet but steady undercurrent of rural life, hidden behind silence and complicity. After all, a trap leaves little trace, and neighbours often look the other way. The debate remains unresolved, but in the boy's nervous glance you feel the truth. Tonight the grumble in his stomach speaks louder than the law. Later, in the cottage, the rabbit is skinned with care. The scent of raw meat mingles with smoke, sharp and metallic. Every scrap is saved for the stew, the pelt for a pouch, the bones for broth. The animal becomes not just food, but a cascade of resources. Proof that in this world, nothing was wasted. You taste the stew that night, heartier than plain cabbage. Sweet with a hint of the wild, here, too, a peculiar superstition lingers. Some villagers believed eating hare brought agility, that children who ate rabbit might run faster, escaping sickness or ill luck. Others whispered that deer carried sacred protection and should not be killed at all. Such contradictions reflect the fine line between reverence for nature and hunger's relentless pull. You recall how fiercely the church and crown guarded hunting rights. Royal forests sprawled across England and France, where even gathering firewood or snaring birds could bring harsh penalties. Yet, in the shadows of peasant villages, survival reshaped the rules. No edict could quiet an empty belly. The stew is ready, thickened with barley and leeks. The family gathers, bowls steaming in their hands. The father mutters, "Thanks to the forest's mercy." The boy grins at his small triumph. You sip with them, tasting a warmth that feels illicit, a gift borrowed from the woods. You realise hunting here was not sport, but a gamble, with the law, with the neighbour's eyes, with the risk of the trap springing empty. Yet every rabbit, every pigeon, every squirrel caught in winter pushed death back one more step. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, bellies are a little fuller, spirits a little lighter. The rabbit's bones click in the pot, stewing into a broth to be sipped until morning. You lean back, your breath heavy with smoke and meat, feeling the fragile balance between defiance and survival. The village lane leads you to a frozen stream, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the pale grey sky. You kneel, rapping it with your knuckle. It is solid, but you can hear a faint gurgle beneath, as if the water whispers its secrets under a hard shell. Here, food still lives, while fields lie dormant and game hides deep. Fish remain a steady source. If you can catch them, you see two men approach, wrapped in patched cloaks. They carry iron tip.
So, as you sit by the hearth, the scent of fried cabbage clinging to your hair, you realize winter's survival wasn't just about grain or meat. It was also about what melted into the pot, what was spread on the bread, what lingered on your lips long after the meal. Butter and lard might seem humble, but in this season, they were riches not in coin, but in calories. In the morning, the snow falls, the air carrying a crisp, cleaner edge after the storm. As you wander to the village outskirts, a new scent draws you sweet, rich, golden. In a modest cottage, a family gathers around something extraordinary, a small clay pot brimming with fat. Honey. In a world where sugar was not yet part of daily life, honey was a rare treasure, capable of sweetening meals and lifting spirits alike. You lean in, the pot pulls faintly in the dim firelight, its viscous content shimmering like captured sunlight. And evil account books confirm that honey was the primary sweetener available to peasants centuries before imported sugar became commonplace. He's where both cherished and feared. His word ended carefully in wicker-esque, EPS or hollowed logs. Villagers risked stings and smoke to gather the thick amber liquid, knowing the joy it brought was unique against winter's monotony. A peculiar custom unfolds before you. The father dips a wooden spoon into the pot, drizzles a thin stream over bread, and offers it reverently to the smallest child. The child licks slowly, eyes wide at the sticky sweetness, as if tasting magic itself. In thought regions, parents have infants honey to soothe them, believing it can not just the body but the soul. To you, it feels like an indulgence, but to them, it is summer's memories stored in a jar. Academic debate persists. Just how common with honey in the peasant diet? Some argue beekeeping was widespread, with even poor households maintaining a half a queue. Others contend that much honey was rendered as rent or tribute to lords and monasteries, leaving little for the villagers themselves. Perhaps like many foods, its presence varied from place to place, abundant in some regions, rare and coveted in others. In this cottage, however, honey had clearly a seasonal delicacy, doled out in tiny amounts to brighten the hearthlands. The mother now stirs a spoonful of honey into a bowl of steaming porridge. The scent changes instantly. Earthy oats become fragrant, inviting. You take a bite, marveling at the difference. Sweetness softens the rough texture, making it feel less like survival, more like comfort. No wonder honey often graced feast Wednesday meals, drizzled on bread or mixed into weak kale. Even a drop could alter the mood of a whole table. Minus documented. Honey was also medicine. See, medieval herbals praised it for healing sore throats, wounds, and fevers. Mixed with garlic, it was a folk remedy for coughs. Combined with herbs, it soothed burns or cuts. You can imagine villagers rationing it carefully, not just for taste but for healing, treating the pot as both larder and apothecary. Another peculiar belief comes from folk tradition. Bees themselves were thought to represent luck and order. Families whispered news of births, deaths, and marriages to the hives, fearing disaster if the bees worked apt in the dark. Hives might even be draped with cloth during funerals to keep the bees from leaving. The link between bees and community, honey and harmony, feels almost poetic as you watch the family savor this golden liquid. The pot is sealed again, wrapped tightly in cloth, placed on a high shelf away from greedy hands, will not be touched again for days, perhaps weeks, until another special moment demands it. Meanwhile, the children lick their fingers, grinning, cheeks sticky. The happiness lingers in the room long after the sweetness is gone. You walk back outside, snow crunching underfoot. Their thoughts drift to the bees themselves, hives hidden at the forest's edge, humming even in the cooler months when the sun allowed. The buzz of summer wings, now silent, its bounty preserved as liquid gold for the dark season. Honey is more than food, it is sunlight carried forward, a reminder that warmth and flowers will return. Experts note honey played a role in brewing too. A fermented honey drink was prized at feasts, but often too costly for everyday peasant use. Still, an occasional pot brewed into drink could elevate a holiday beyond the ordinary. Imagine sipping such sweetness as snow piled against the door, your heart lightened temporarily by the taste of summer wine. As he returned to the cottage, the hearth fire crackles, the air faintly scented with honey's residue. The family returns to routine, strengthened not just by calories but by the mood's lift. You realize how crucial such moments were. Winter wasn't just about endurance, it was also about hope. And honey, golden and scarce, was hope crystallized in every drop. You close your eyes, imagining the sticky sweetness on the tongue, the buzz of bees in fields long gone, the promise of spring hidden in a clay pot. With that thought, you understand, in the hardest months, survival required not just bread and meat, but also the sweetness that reminded you why you survived. You follow a path into the woods, branches bowed under the weight of frost. There, the forest floor, though blanketed in snow, still holds secrets from warmer months. You crouch low, brushing aside brittle leaves to find hazelnuts scattered in the dirt. Their shells are rough brown, cold to the touch, but in Sapphire's dense, oily aching. For the medieval peasant, nuts and dried fruits were not everyday luxuries, they were seasonal gifts, carefully saved to last the barren weeks. Household accounts show peasants typically gathered hazelnuts, acorns, and chestnuts in autumn, storing them in bags or burying them in dray pits. When winter pressed harsh, these small hoards became treasures. The sound of hazelnut shells cracking on stone was a quiet relief, a reminder the forest still shared its bounty. The taste, sweet, earthy, slightly buttery, added variety to otherwise monotonous meals of grain and cabbage. A peculiar survival trick emerges from folklore. In some places, villagers strung nuts on cords hung from rafters, both to dry them and as talismans against misfortune. Children often treated these strings as toys, stealing a nut at a time until only the cord remained. Such small rituals added playfulness to a life bound by routine. Experts still debate how often dried fruits like prunes or crabapples supplemented the peasant diet. Some argue they were rare since drying required time and fuel resources always strained. Others contend that wild berries, dried by sun or hearth fire, were common enough to provide sweet bursts in stews or breads. Gary seeds found in latrine pits lend some evidence to the latter, but truth is elusive. The villagers eat them regularly, or only as artisanal treats. The debate hums eyes around summer bushes. In a cottage, you watch a woman crack hazelnuts with a stone, tossing the kernels into a pot of boiling porridge. The smell changes at once, nutty and warm, mingling with the grain's earthiness. Children edge closer, eager for their share, while the father sprinkles in some dried crabapples, shriveled but still tart. The stew, once plain, now carries a hint of sweetness and crunch. You taste it, feeling a small thrill so little added, yet such a large effect. Minus documented. In times of scarcity, villagers turned to acorns, soaking them in water for days to leach out bitterness, then grinding them into flour. The process was laborious, the taste mediocre, yet acorn bread warded off hunger. You can imagine the smoky taste of acorn bread baked in the communal oven, the texture rough, the flavor astringent, but still filling. A peculiar belief whispers in your mind. Some villagers thought hazelnuts carried wisdom, that eating them made one quick minded, eating granted visions. Irish tales speak of salmon that ate hazel less and grew wise, their flesh filled with knowledge. The peasants laugh at such lore as they crack shells by the hearth, or secretly hope a handful of nuts might bring clarity and dark time. You wander deeper into the woods, birds flitting among bare branches. Here, berries cling stubbornly, shriveled but edible. You pluck a handful of dried sloes. The skin is tough, the flesh sour. Properly dried in item, they have been added to pies or boiled into syrup. Tonight, they sting your tongue. Yet, you feel the comfort. They offered color and flavor against winter's pale palate. Scholars note dried fruits had medicinal value too. Rosy hips, rich in vitamin C, were brewed into tonics for scurvy-like ailments. Whether villagers understood the science is doubtful, but they believed in the healing warmth of such infusions. Imagine sipping a steaming cup of berry infusion while the storm howls outside. Every swallow a thread connecting you to summer fields. In another home, you see a sack of walnuts, shells darker, harder to crack. The father works patiently, prying them open as the children nibble the soft meat inside. Their fingers glisten with oil, and they laugh, wiping them on their tunics. For a brief moment, winter feels lighter. The nuts might not last forever, but while they do, they turn monotony into festival. The debate continues. Are nuts and berries marginal to survival, or quietly essential? You suspect the truth lies in their dual role. They didn't provide the bulk of calories that bread and porridge did, but they added hope, pleasure, and variety, softening hunger's sharp edges. Sometimes survival isn't just about fuel, it's about keeping despair at bay. As the hearth fire burns low, you close your eyes, imagining the crunch of hazelnuts, the tartness of sloes, the sticky sweetness of crab apples. These are not banquets. They are footnotes in the winter diet. Yet, in those footnotes lies humanity, the impulse to savor, to delight, even in hardship. You rise and leave the cottage, the wind outside stirring bare branches. Somewhere under the snow, roots cling tight, stored nuts wait patiently, and you realize the story of winter survival is written not just in bread and hams, but also in these overlooked little treasures, quietly falling into bowls, lighting the long march toward spring. As you return to the village center, snow crunching underfoot, smoke from dozens of chimneys spirals upward like pale gray ribbons. You step into another cottage, greeted first by a scent both sharp and soothing herbs simmering in a pot. These are not fine spices from distant markets, those belong to lords and merchants, but humble green things from the peasant garden. On the table lies a bundle of dried stems tied with twine, thyme, parsley, dill, wild garlic, gathered months ago, now brittle but still fragrant. The mine is documented. Peasants relied on these herbs not just to flavor otherwise plain dishes, but also to heal wounds, calm fevers, ease winter coughs. The aroma rising from the great pot is proof. Simple oats to becomes more complex, almost luxurious, with a handful of herbs tossed in at the right moment. A peculiar detail manifests in the corner. The grandmother takes up a sprig of rosemary, not for cooking, but to wave gently in the air, murmuring that it drives away bad moods and restless spirits. In some regions, villagers even tuck garlic cloves into their frames, convinced it kept witches at bay or warded off sickness. You smile at the sight. Food and faith are so tightly woven that the act of cooking becomes a kind of spell. Scholars still debate just how effective these herbal practices were. Some argue the antibacterial properties of garlic and onions indeed helped, while others see much of it as superstition wrapped in ritual. Perhaps both are true. You drink now from the bowl, feeling a warmth that goes beyond calories, as if faith itself has a taste woven into every spoonful. The mother explains how she dried the herbs in late summer, hanging them from rafters, letting smoke keep them from rotting. Now, in deep winter, she crumbles them into the stew with practiced hands. The dried thyme is brittle, pungent when crushed. Even a pinch can turn broth from thin to savory. Imagine what that tiny shift felt like when meals were thin for weeks on end. Monastic herbals record that peasants often passed knowledge at healing plants down through generations: parsley for digestion, sage for sore throats, fennel for childbirth. This knowledge was half memory, half belief, binding the community together. Despite the lack of scientific certainty, the rituals gave confidence sometimes as important as medicine. When nights felt endless, a peculiar folk custom surfaces in your mind. Villagers brewed green decoctions from nettles or sorrel even in winter, believing they strengthened the blood. Children work oaks to sip the bitter liquid, making faces, but mothers soothed. The sting of nettles vanished in boiling water, leaving an earthy taste that symbolized health itself. You look again at the pot over the hearth. Pearly bubbles at the bottom. Cabbage floats on top. Herbs drift in the middle like green sparks. The broth is alive with scent, pungent parsley, sweet dill, sharp garlic. The family leans forward, inhaling before they even taste. Flavor mattered here as much as fuel. Without it, the monotony of the winter diet would wear down the spirit. With it, even a thin meal felt renewed. The historians still debate whether peasants truly had access to imported spices. A few records mention pepper or cinnamon appearing in villages, usually smuggled or gifted. Like, for most, birds were the true flavor of life, rooted in their own soil. You sense how this reality shaped their palate, sharp, earthy, robust, directly connected to the land at our feet. You spoon another taste. The flavor is plain yet layered. Green notes from a chorus against the grain's backdrop. Warmth fills you, and you exhale, realizing how much comfort a handful of dried leaves could bring. The children chuckle softly, dipping bread into the broth, lips shining with steam. For a moment, the cottage feels less like a battleground against the cold, more like a sanctuary of flavor and faith. Later, when the pot is empty, the grandmother tucks the last sprig of rosemary into a small bag hung by the door. She murmurs a final charm, believing it will keep hunger and sickness from crossing the threshold. Whether you believe her words or not, you can feel the steadiness it gives the household. Herbs were more than seasoning. They soothed, protected, and reminded the family that against winter's vastness, they were not powerless. As you step outside into the sharp air, you realize something simple yet profound. Survival wasn't just about filling bellies. It was about the little sparks of taste, ritual, and belief that reminded weary souls why they kept going. Herbs, fragile and fragrant, were winter's poetry written in steam and whispered incantations. You pick your way down a narrow alley where frost clings stubbornly to cottage timbers. Even before you step inside, a smell reaches you, pungent, unmistakable, the scent of onions that cuts through smoke and damp, and you know at once that this cottage, like many others, leaned heavily on this humble bulb. Baskets sit in the corner, filled with onions of various sizes, their papery skins rustling as the mother shifts them. Some white and smooth, others streaked with purple and rough, all stored since autumn in cool, dry places. Well, minus documented. Onions were among the most indispensable vegetables in the medieval kitchen. Not only did they grow reliably in ordinary soil, but they stored well, lasting months into winter when other crops had long vanished. A peculiar practice catches your eye. The grandmother peels an onion, not for cooking, but to rub along the threshold. She murmurs that it will keep sickness from entering. In parts of Europe, onions were strung into garlands and hung in cottages, believed to absorb bad air or ward off spirits. Imagine walking into a smoky, crowded cottage and seeing onions dangling like strange decorations. Superstition or practicality? Perhaps both. Modern researchers still debate just how central onions were compared to other vegetables. Some argue leeks and cabbages held equal importance, while others point to onions' persistent presence in manuscripts, recipes, and household records. Whatever the case, the smell you encounter now tells you this family pinned their faith on the bulb's sharp bite. Is it by the hearth, as the mother chops onions into a boiling pottage? The sound is rhythmic, the knife thumping dully on the board. Thawing tears streak her cheeks, though she pays them no mind. Everyone here is used to the sting. The onions soften quickly in the pot, their scent mellowing, mingling with turnips and barley. As the father ladles the stew into bowls, steam rises thickly, fragrant and rich. You taste it. Sweetness first, Then sharpness, layers of flavor of filling your mouth. The onion transforms bland broth into something memorable. Well, mine is documented. Onions were medicine too. They were pounded into poultices for wounds, mixed with honey for coughs, even roasted to relieve irritants. Some villagers ate raw onions with bread before hard labor, believing the bite gave strength. Indeed, that burning taste wakes you at once, alerting your senses in a way no porridge ever could. A peculiar tale floats from the family's conversation. In especially harsh winters, some villagers believed if onions placed on windowsills drew out sickness. Come spring, the blackened onions were a discarded proof they'd absorbed the season's dangers. Whether placebo effect or faith, such rituals reveal how tightly food was tied to survival, body and soul. Academic debate continues. Did peasants grow onions primarily for their own use or to pay rents and tithes? Records show both. Baskets of onions went to the Lord, but plenty remained for stews and medicine. You can imagine the pressure of surrendering part of your stores while knowing every onion meant heartier pots in winter. Children nibble slices of raw onion with their bread, faces contorting at the sharpness, then bursting into laughter. Even in hardship, the onion's bite becomes a game. You chewing them, eyeing a small piece of raw onion, feeling its fire burn your tongue, lingering long after you swallow. Strangely, it weaves warmth in your chest, reminding you that survival isn't always pleasant. It is always potent. As night deepens, the baskets are covered again with cloth, the precious cargo tucked away. You notice a string of onions hanging near the rafters, swaying gently in a draft, and you realize they are more than food. They are guardians, flavor minus makers, healers, and symbols. So you walk back into the frost, the sadness still on your lips. You carry the knowledge that peasants depended on onions as both shield and sustenance. In every stew, every remedy, every charm against unseen things, this bulb played its quiet, vital part. In the quiet of the snow-packed lane, you think of how much weight such a simple vegetable carried. No feasts, no lavish spices, just a bulb from the soil, storing the power to push a family one more night toward spring. Overnight, the snow deepens, a thorough silencing, so that you wake to a world hushed as if the whole village holds its breath. Yet, in one cottage, the air is tense. The family sits around the table, not to eat but to take stock. The half-empty sack of grain lies open, the father frowning as he runs his hands through the dwindling kernels. The expression on his face is familiar, the fear of shortage. It's recorded again and again in manorial rolls and local chronicles. Terrain was the backbone of medieval life. Barley, rye, and oats formed the daily bread, but they were fragile. A wet summer could rat the harvest, a cold snap stunt growth. The line between sufficiency and disaster was thin. The family you observe now knows this well. Every scoop from the sack is a calculation. Every loaf a gamble. A peculiar coping trick surfaces. Here some villagers bulked out their flour by adding peas, beans, even ground weeds. In desperation, chestnuts or acorns might be mixed in. The resulting bread was coarse, bitter, sometimes nearly inedible, but it filled the belly. Imagine chewing bread so hard it could crack teeth, yet feeling a thrill of relief simply because something was in your stomach. And hunger doesn't demand deliciousness, it demands endurance. And scholars still debate just how frequent true shortages were in called normal years. Some argue most villages, barring disaster, fed themselves adequately, if and eagerly. Others counter with records of frequent lean years where prices soared and towns rioted. Archaeological finds of malnourished skeletons support the darker view. The truth was likely cyclical: 1 year of plenty, the next of hunger, every winter carrying uncertainty. You watch the mother measure grain carefully into a small wooden bowl. Your hands are steady, but her eyes are heavy. She pours the grain into a quern, and the rhythmic grinding begins. The sound is steady, honest, hypnotic, like a heartbeat echoing in the room. Flour dust floats into the air, settling on the children's hair, making them look as if snow has followed them inside. The resulting flour is dark, flecked with husks. There will be no soft white bread here that was for nobles and monasteries. Instead, the bread will be dense, almost stony, nourishing but plain. The father sighs, knowing months remain before fields green. He mutters that what's in the sack might not be enough. His voice is low, but the children hear, and their laughter dims. Well, mine is documented. Medieval villages often feared not the cold itself, but the failure of the grain. Grain was not just food, it was currency, rent, tithe. When the Lord claimed his share, it meant less bread on the table. When the church demanded offering, families gave even as their stores dwindled. So a grain shortage wasn't just empty bellies, it was a crisis of obligation. A peculiar superstition surfaces in your mind in some villages. People placed a single grain on a windowsill, believing it would multiply by spring. Others carried small bags of seed under their clothes, as if the warmth near the body might encourage abundance. Such gestures might sound naive, but they reveal the desperation of lives ruled by weather and fate. You dip a piece of today's bread into the stew and taste. The texture is dense, almost gluey, sour with rye. It fills you but does not comfort. Eating it feels like swallowing a reminder of limit. Yet to this family, it is a lifeline, even as each slice is thinner than the last. Experts also point to the psychological strain of shortage. Imagine the terror of watching the sack shrink, the calculus of eating better now or starving later. In recorded famines, parents reduced their own portions to feed children, sometimes collapsing from weakness. The weight of such decisions hangs silently in this cottage as the father counts kernels with his eyes. Scholars debate over how villagers mitigated these crises continues. Did communities pool resources, or did each household fend alone? Records show both. Some villages shared by custom, others fractured under strain. Tonight to feel both possibility. This family drank their grain quickly, but they with have neighbors off, and you might have sharing will occur. As the bread cools, the family divides it into equal portions. The children chew slowly, savoring each bite, while the parents sit silent. The air holds more than smoke, it carries unspoken fear and calculation. To step outside into the frozen hush, the fields lie empty under snow, hiding the soil that will decide next year's fate. And you realize winter isn't just about what peasants eat now, but what they fear they won't eat later. Hunger is not just absence, it is foresight. Gnawing months ahead, as the moon glints on frozen ridges, you hear the whisper of countless winters past the rustle of empty sacks, the weary grind of the corn, murmured prayers to fields that might or might not forgive. The air grows colder, as if the village itself has sunk deeper into silence. You walk past shuttered windows, faint candle-minus glow behind them, and feel a heaviness unrelated to snow. In one cottage, you find a group huddled together, not eating but remembering. Their voices are low, grave, recalling winters past when grain sacks emptied and the word on everyone's lips was famine. Well, mine is documented. Medieval Europe suffered wave after wave of famine. The Great Famine of 1315-1317 stands out, and relentless rains ruined harvests across much of the continent. Crops rotted in fields, livestock died in mud, and whole villages watched food vanish. Chronicles of the time describe people eating cats, dogs, and in desperate whispers worse. Though centuries have passed, the memory of such winters passed down through generations in peasant folklore, casting a shadow over every hearth. Listen, a peculiar story surfaces. An old woman recalls her grandmother mixing ground tree bark into flour, making bread almost inedible yet keeping the family alive. Others mention chewing boiled nettle stems, roots hastily dug from frozen earth. These tales are half legend, half memory, but they remind you how resourceful human ingenuity becomes when pushed to hunger's edge. Scholars still debate the exact death tolls of medieval famines. Some argue mortality was catastrophic, wiping out entire regions. Others insist many communities survived with resilience, if not unscathed. Records are fragmentary, written by priests or lords who often exaggerated or downplayed. Yet the debate feels almost irrelevant to the family before you. To them, famine is not a statistic, it is living legacy, told to children each winter so they remember never to waste a crumb. The father described softly a year when grain ran out by February, and no bread could be baked. Villagers for aged like animals, scouring hedgerows for acorns, eating grass boiled until it lost all bitterness. His voice catches as he recalls neighbors wasting away not suddenly, but slowly, each day marked by weakness, each week accompanied by another death. The children listen wide-mouthed aside, their bowls empty but their imaginations full. Fear mingles with fascination. They are not hungry tonight, but the stories seep into their bones. Famine is not a ghost of the past. It is a possibility always lurking at the door. You notice these tales are not just memories. They are warnings disguised as stories, reminders to ration carefully, plant wisely, never grow complacent. In times of relative plenty, famine still haunts the mind like an uninvited guest. Even with bread on the table, the taste carries caution. Parish records note that famine often reshaped communities. Some villages lost so many people that fields lay fallow for years, while others saw waves of migration as survivors sought better land. Hunger bred new customs, sharing feasts when possible, preserving food more carefully, locking seed grain away. The echo of famine reshaped not just diet but identity. A peculiar belief emerges from the old woman's tale. She claims her ancestors hung straw crosses over granaries, believing it kept hunger-minded spirits from stealing the harvest. In other regions, villagers lit bonfires on frozen fields, hoping to drive off winter's curse. Whether ritual or desperation, such practices reveal how people tried to master forces beyond their control. You close your eyes a moment, picturing the gray skies of the Great Famine, the smell of rotten fields, the silence of empty barns, the gnat and kicking through mud, feet ardent, belly hollow, clutching anything at a go. Suddenly, the ordinary bowl of porridge you ate yesterday feels like luxury. The past weighs heavily on the present, teaching gratitude through fear. Modern historians still debate were famines purely natural disasters caused by rain, frost, or plague, or did political and social systems worsen them? Some argue an even distribution, taxes and obligations to lords deepen hunger, while others see nature as the true tyrant. Perhaps both are true. You can almost hear the peasants themselves sighing the cause matters less than the gnawing pain in the belly. Tonight, as the family finishes these stories, a light an extra candle, as if light itself could banish famine's shadow. The children drift to sleep to whispers of bark minus bread and nettle stew. The adults stay awake, gazing into the hearth fire, their silence heavy with the memory of ancient hunger. You step outside, the cold night pressing close, and realize something profound. For peasants, famine wasn't just an event, it was a character in their lives, a predator that might track them again at any time. It shaped their habits, beliefs, rituals, even their sense of time. Fiat belly's fall, its shadow lingered, a reminder that every winter was a gift. As you walk away, the snow crunches underfoot, but the sound feels different now. Less like frost, more like bone. And you carry these stories as they once did as reminders that survival through winter was never a guarantee, only alone. The parish church bell tolls faintly in the frosty air, and you follow its echo to the village square. People move slowly, wrapped in cloaks patched and draped, but their faces hold expectation. It is a saint's day, and though now that many households, the church promises food. You step into the stone church's shadow, and the smell greets you: roast meat, rich and savory, feeling almost impossible in bleak midwinter. Enorial accounts swelled argument that church feasts punctuated the poor's monotonous diet. While lords and monasteries feasted, peasants might be invited to share leftovers on holy days. Cattle, sheep, or pigs slaughtered as offerings or for ritual often found their way to commoners' tables. For villagers, these feasts were not just spiritual obligations but material relief, moments when hunger gave way to plenty. A peculiar scene unfolds before you. Children pass eagerly against long trestle tables, waiting for their portion of beef dripping with juices. A priest blesses the food, sprinkles holy water, then slices portions onto rough drenchers of bread. Some families cross themselves before eating, murmuring thanks that today for once their meal has flavor and fullness. In some regions, parish records show feasts even included sweet puddings or spice tail, luxuries peasants rarely tasted. Experts still debate just how generous these church feasts were. Some historians argue monasteries offered them as charity and community, providing meaningful relief in need. Others insist they were sporadic and sufficient symbolic more than substantive. Perhaps the truth lies between. One night of forgotten hunger, but the next morning, bread and porridge returned. Yet the memory's glow lasted, a reminder that life could occasionally taste of abundance. You watch villagers gather at the long table, steam rising in tendrils. The air fills with laughter chatter, the clatter of knives. You taste a slice of mutton, tender and fatty, the juices seeping into the rough bread beneath. The flavor spreads on your tongue, and you feel a shiver of delight, imagining how miraculous this would feel after weeks of roots and broth. The warmth penetrates deeper than the food itself. It is the warmth of community and being part of something larger than individual household struggles. A peculiar tradition surfaces. During the feast, the priest ensures leftover bones from the roast go to the poorest families, who will boil them again and again for soup. In some villages, even the marrow bone was considered lucky, hung over a door as a talisman to attract plenty. To you, it feels both practical and poetic, the church providing not just nourishment but symbols of hope. Foes. Minus documented. Church feasts also provided fish on Fridays and Lent. Though peasants fished themselves, the church sometimes distributed salted herring or dried cod imported from distant coasts. These were luxuries compared to what villagers usually cobbled together. Imagine the wonder of tasting food from afar away. See a reminder the world was wider than the fields and woods you knew. Scholars still debate the motivations behind such generosity. Was it true charity, a way to bind community, or a strategy to maintain loyalty, reinforce hierarchy? To the hungry family before you, the question hardly matters. They eat, and their bellies for tonight at least are full. You notice how joy reshapes the atmosphere. Children run with greasy fingers, elders smile through gaps in teeth, even weary mothers laugh as they sip spiced ale. The sound is different from quiet meals at home. It is louder, freer, as to rebellion against the pressing cold outside. You feel it, to the strange intoxication of shared abundance. Later, when platters are empty and candles guttering, the priest speaks of gratitude and endurance, reminding villagers that winter is God's test, that the people, though solemn, still smile, their bellies full of meat and bread. They will carry this memory back to cottages, talking of it for days. The taste will fade, but the reminder of possibility will last. As you step outside, a night is crisp, stars scattered above. The square is quiet now, bones and scraps carried home, footsteps crunching away into darkness, and you realize these feasts were more than meals. They were interludes in the rhythm of scarcity, tiny windows into a life of plenty, proof that even in the harshest winter, there could be moments of celebration. So, as you leave, you carry the warmth of roast meat and laughter. Hunger will return tomorrow, but tonight the village ate together, and for a few hours they tasted joy. Dawn's faint light glimmers on ice-clad roofs as you wander to the village's heart. Here, every week, even in winter, the square becomes a market. Snow is shoveled aside, straw scattered underfoot, rough stalls propped with planks and poles. The air is biting but alive with the sound of bargaining voices haggling, coins clinking, sacks shifting on weary shoulders. Minus documented, markets were idle to medieval life. Villagers who produced small surpluses, beans, dried peas, bunches of onions, even bits of salt fish would trade here for what they lacked. Without such gatherings, isolated households might starve alone. Markets wove communities together like threads in a patchwork cloak, offering resilience in the coldest times. You walk past stalls heaped with winter staples. A sack of dried beans spills across a table, small and pale, unremarkable yet rich in protein. A fishmonger unwrapped slayers of cloth to reveal slabs of salt herring. The smell pungent, cutting through the frosty air. Across the way, a woman lays out a small pile of wool gloves she's knitted, hoping to trade for flour. The air is thick with contrast things that sustain life, humbly piled, displayed with quiet pride. A peculiar custom catches your eye. A peasant sprinkles ash over his pile of turnips, muttering that it prevents rotten thieves. Whether superstition or clever deterrent, the gesture draws curious glances from children who giggle at the idea of vegetables cursed against greedy hands. Humor masks truth. Every turnip is precious. Every theft a serious blow. Researchers still debate just how affordable markets were for peasants. Some argue winter prices soared, putting most goods out of reach, especially in shortage years. Others contend that British systems cloth for beans, labor for fish kept even the poorest households connected. Looking around, you see both truths. One man leaves empty minus-handed. Unable to afford salt, a woman secures a loaf by promising help mending nets come spring. You approaches all where barrels of salt fish stand like sentinels. The merchant chips ice from a lid, releasing a powerful salty odor. Herring, cod, or pilchards. These were apples brought deep inland from coastal towns. For inland villages, these fish were both exotic and essential, especially on church-mandated meatless days. The texture is leathery, the taste fiercely salty, but boiled with barley and onions, it becomes something nourishing. Imagine the relief of obtaining even a small piece, knowing it could stretch for multiple meals.